Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 96 of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, this episode is a little continuation of the previous one where I talked a little bit about the jurying process that I was honored to be able to participate in the jurying process for the Gallery Photographica International Photography Competition and Exhibition to be held in San Francisco. And last time I talked about the process of taking 1,755 photographs and narrowing that field down to a mere 40 photographs, and what that was like, that process of editing someone else's body of work or a huge body of work from many different photographers. And today I wanted to spend a little bit of time with the three photographs that were the Prizewinner photographs, the first, second, and third place images. Now, again, if you listen to the previous episode of Camera Position, one of the things that you'll remember me saying is that, boy, this was a hugely beautiful group of photographs. I mean, there were some really terrific images, and many of those really terrific images sadly wound up on the cutting room floor. And so the process of getting that large group of images down to 40 was difficult, but boy, the process of selecting a first, second, and third place winner photograph was, I think, perhaps the most difficult thing of all of the whole process. So I thought I would go through the images that I selected as the first, second, and third place winners, and talk a little bit about each of them and see if I could explain what it was about these pictures that really caught my attention and that certainly made them, in my mind, to be the winning pictures in the group. The first place winner was a photograph by Micah Guerin. Micah's photograph, Afghan Poppy Farmer in Marja, was the first place winner. And, you know, I have to say that one of the things about this particular picture was that it stuck in my mind from the very first run through the stack of photographs. From the moment that I started looking at these pictures in a critical way, with a critical eye, this was a picture that I thought to myself, wow, what a photograph. I am drawn to portrait photographs generally, but I'm not particularly a portrait photographer myself, but I'm very drawn to portrait photographs. But there was something about this particular picture where the subject's gaze, combined with the way he's dressed and his general attitude, was both incredibly engaging and also kind of off-putting in a way. There's something about this particular guy, the way in which he shows his face to us, the way he's contemplating the camera, that really kind of got to me. Photographically, I loved the blank sky behind him, the fact that it was a blank background behind him. The quality of light was really beautiful. The way there's a bit of a rim light that comes in from his left or our right-hand side of the image. And the incredibly beautiful shallow depth of field. The fact that the photograph is focused on the plane of his face and most everything else is out of focus. A little bit of the cloth he wears around his neck, his beard is in focus, his eyes, obviously an important part of a portrait photograph to be in focus, but the fall off of focus so that his ears are out of focus really grabbed me. I think that's part of what makes the picture so powerful, is because he confronts us in a way that gives us a sense of proximity, the sense that he is right there in our physical space. An incredibly beautiful photograph. And of course, as I had mentioned before, I had judged all of these pictures anonymously. I did not know anything about the photographers. I didn't know who they were. And it wasn't until after I had learned who the photographers were, after I had concluded the judging and had submitted my results to David Garrick, the organizer of this exhibition, that I learned that this photograph was by Micah Guerin. And what was interesting about learning that it was by Micah Guerin was that I learned that it was part of a body of work, that he had made in Afghanistan of photographs of soldiers and native Afghans alike, and most of these pictures, if not all of them, were made with a large format camera, which of course is what contributes to that beautiful shallow depth of field. So the idea of the large format camera, the idea of the contemplation of this kind of a picture, the fact that the photographer and the subject had to reach a kind of mutually agreeable set of moments here, because the view camera photographer needs to really be slow and contemplative about the process of making a picture, especially if it's a portrait, because it's such a much more complex process than simply making a picture with, and I don't mean simply, but making a picture with a smaller format camera. So this was a picture that grabbed my attention from the very beginning and continued to be at the top of my stack of images as I narrowed down the group of pictures, and then wound up being what I thought to be the very best picture in the group of images that were submitted. A really strong photograph. Moving on to the second place winner, Diane Fox's photograph, Birds, La Specola, Florence, Italy, was my second place winner. And this was also a picture that I found interesting, and I found it interesting because it was so complex. A picture based on reflection, a picture based on the way in which these reflections function within the photograph, some reflection, some objects that we see directly. And then the thing that just really got to me was in the very back of the photograph, top left corner of the photograph, there is this pictograph of an escape route, for emergency purposes in whatever space Diane made this photograph in. There's this graphic of an escape route, and people, this graphic where somebody's running or fleeing. And the whole notion of flight, these flightless birds, they're sitting steady, perched on something, and then these pictographs of a human flying in flight behind really just drew me in. And it was that complexity of the picture, not just the picture itself, but the way in which the picture was complex visually, in terms of its organization and its picture space. I kept looking at it and kept looking into it and seeing all the different layers of imagery within it, and the fact that there are birds upon birds upon birds, and then these pictographs of humans in flight behind really grabbed me and drew me in. And again, a really interesting photograph, one that caused me to continue to think about it. It too was near the top of my stack all the way through the judging process, but it was also a picture that required my looking at it a bit more. So one of the things that was really interesting about this process was, due to the way I was, in fact, looking at the pictures and thinking about them, this was a picture that as were all of the photographs that ended up toward the top of the stack and getting into the exhibition, this was a picture that really required my viewing repeatedly over and over again to see all of its complexities. And so it was a really positive thing to have this length of time to look at the pictures over the week or so that I took to work my way through this big group of images. Moving on now to the third place image, Edie Fogel. Edie Fogel, a photographer whose work actually, much of her work ended up kind of being in that final several hundred photographs. She had submitted several of these images that were what she called multi-process tintype. I didn't have a particular preference or bias toward any particular process as I looked at these images, but the fact that it was identified as having something to do with a tintype, and then later as I looked at it, realized that it had been manipulated in some way to add color to the tintype. But the look of this image certainly drew me in. The look of the way in which it was made, the sort of age that it suggested, and the way that interacted with the subject itself. And certainly my interest in the history of photography, as many of you know, I teach the history of photography and do that podcast about the history of photography class that I teach. And so that certainly was interesting to me as I looked at this particular photograph. So it was the look of this photograph the muted colors, this surface that's sort of cloudy and abraded and variegated in a variety of ways, the weird little markings on the surface of the image or what appear to be the surface of the image, and the fading aspect of it around the edges. So it has to it an antique quality. Now, the fact that it was a tintype that created that antique quality may or may not have mattered much at all. What did matter was, in the end, was this aspect of time. Photographic time, historical time, the inclusion of this watch that's in the image, but not just the inclusion of the watch, the fact that the watch is floating, but not just that the fact that the watch is floating, but that it's obviously placed there with these strings that are really obvious. And I love that idea that here in our age of digital manipulation and hiding your tracks and having something, hovering or floating in midair being something that we can do easily, here is Edie Fogel making this photograph where it's so obvious that the object is not just floating in midair, it's being hung there in a certain way, hung above the subject's hands, and all of this muted color and where the focus is and the fact that the focus is on the watch and on the hands. And boy, the whole thing really drew me in. But ultimately, it was the notion of time. Time is such an important part of photography. It's such an important part of the way we contemplate photography, both in terms of exposure time, but also the passage of time, arresting time. And this whole way of just talking about time in this picture really got to me and really drew me in, both by the look and feel of the image, but also the subject matter and the message that the image was delivering. Edie's pictures ended up toward this top of my stack. Several of her images ended up in the top several hundred, and ultimately I called out this image partly because of the sense of time and that idea of speaking photographically about the thing that photography really depends upon, that passage of time and our sense of what time is. So there are three photographs, the three, what I considered the three best of the best. Now, again, best of the best. That's been an interesting concept. Some of you perhaps have seen some discussion on the cameraposition.com blog page about the way in which these kinds of decisions are reached. Hopefully through these podcasts, you're at least getting an idea of how I went about the process of judging or jurying these images. Not an easy task, to be sure, and certainly not an easy task to pick three best images out of some extraordinary pictures. What I will endeavor to do in the next podcast or two is to highlight some other photographs that were in the exhibition that I really found arresting and interesting, and ones that I hope to be able to talk about in a similar way as to how they ended up in the exhibition and what it was about those pictures that drew me in and made me think about things in a certain way. So hopefully you'll continue on listening to these next few episodes. A couple of notes. One is thanks again for all of the encouragement of being back on track with Camera Position. I'm really happy to be doing it. It's a lot of fun to do and a lot of fun to talk about photography in this way. So thank you very much for those of you who've sent emails and Twitter posts and Facebook posts and so forth and so on. A couple of other notes. One is many of you probably know that I do some workshops during the summertime, and this summer, no exception, I will be traveling to Italy, to Tuscany for one workshop, and then Venice for another workshop. And for information about those workshops, go to photographitaly.com. I am currently about halfway through the registration process, just a few more spots in each one of those workshops, and we'll be full up. So we keep the group really small, and we have a great time, talk about photography and make photographs and think about photography and meet other great photographers. So hopefully one or two of you out there will join us this summer in Tuscany and in Venice. So thanks for listening and being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.